Adam, I'll hand the floor to you, but thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today. So we're here, this is Salesforce Security Office Hours, talking with Adam about how do you build trust in your Salesforce architecture. Sounds very exciting. So we'll just go through a few things about what is office hours, some rules of engagement, intros, and we always like to do a hot off the press, and then I'll hand it off to Adam after that. So what is Security Office Hours? It was really created by me in a troubling response that there were, or rea in response to the troubling reality that a lot of data breaches are still continuing, even now, especially after the last Gainsight breach that's happened. You would think that they'd start being less because of all the noise, but it's actually still occurring and still more. So created office hours so that we can help give a forum for people to understand what are Salesforce security best practices and getting you in touch with experts so you can directly ask questions so you can know what you should be doing today to keep your data safe in Salesforce. So we just have a few rules of engagement. So be respectful to others. It's an open engagement. Feel free to ask questions. Just don't interrupt the speaker. If they're not talking, feel free to speak up or raise your hand or ask questions in the Q&A. But the key here is to take notes and walk away with something actionable that you can implement today. So about me, I'm Matt Myers. I'm the CEO and founder of Easy Protect and a certified technical architect. I've been working the Salesforce ecosystem for more than 18 years. And I'm also author of the Amazon bestseller, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, a book about a customer of mine who got hacked in a misconfigured digital experience environment. My goal is really to help people understand what you need to do to keep your data safe in Salesforce. I hand it off to you, Adam. Do your
Right.
own intro.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. So my name is Adam Olshansky. I'm a Salesforce Technical Architect for Google Play, 18 times certified system and app architect. I have over 10 years of experience working with Salesforce. I've presented at Dreamforce a bunch of times, and I've had the pleasure of speaking at various conferences around the world as well. Also a member of the Salesforce MVP Hall of Fame. My passion, I'm an architect, but my passion is also coding and development. So I enjoy teaching people how to code, specifically on Salesforce. I've been a Rad Women coach, and I also have some Pluralsight courses on Salesforce development, focused on the Platform Developer 1 certification. I also do have a course on advanced Salesforce security, though, as well, though. So also a passionate topic for me, too.
Well, that actually sounds like something very interesting. Maybe Tristan can post a link in that for everybody for a little bit later. So, all right, great. So, well, moving on, Salesforce Security Officers is sponsored and supported by Easy Protect. So I started Easy Protect because for the pure fact that Salesforce doesn't scan files for viruses that are uploaded into Salesforce. And then additionally, that does not scan for malicious URLs. And since a lot of these attacks lately have been really vishing or phishing types of attacks, it's becoming more and more important that that you ensure that you are protecting yourself not just from misconfigurations, but also from malicious content that's entering your Salesforce environment. If you want to know more, you can get a free risk assessment there. All right, so talking about the recap from last time, talked about implementing a zero trust architecture. Basically, a few things that were called out was making sure you stop adding permissions to old profiles and build new access with permission sets and permission set groups, keeping that same zero trust mindset, making sure your connected apps are admin approved, and also ensuring you're disabling or blocking any of those existing connected apps that are in your environment. And then treat agents just like untrusted users in their own identity with minimal access. If you want to learn more, there's the QR code for last time's session. All right, so hot off the press, I mentioned this a little bit just a few minutes ago, but just another big breach was Gainsight. Gainsight, basically what happened was it was very similar to the Drift breach, where a bunch of their tokens were all, I guess, exposed and then getting access to their customers and Salesforce environments to the attackers. But this was really interesting because originally the CEO of Gainsight said there were only a handful of orgs affected, but it ended up being that the Google Threat Intelligence, thank you, Google, says that over 200 instances were potentially compromised. I actually talked to a few of those customers myself when I was on the phone, just ironically. But things like HubSpot, Zendesk, Gone, and all of those revoked tokens, their tokens out of abundance of caution. The issue arose when Salesforce on their trust site was saying that there was an issue with Gainsight, and they were proactively revoking all of the Gainsight tokens, and they took Gainsight off of the App Exchange temporarily until they understood what was going on. So, if you want to know more, there's a QR code for that story. All right, great. So my favorite and non-favorite slide. If you notice, every week we get more and more logos on this slide. These are the breaches that could have been prevented. And as you see, it's like it's very, more and more every week. But the key here is this did not need to happen. We did not need to have all these companies getting all these breaches. And one interesting thing that I noticed recently, a trend is it's not only normal commercial companies that this is happening to. If you notice, there's a lot of logos on here that are actually security companies that where their job is securing environments or even providing services to secure even Salesforce. Like for example, Palo Alto Networks, Tenable. I think there's HackerOne on there and others. And I think it was in there as well, but we just don't have them on the slide. And so it's actually amazing that even the companies that are the security companies, the security monitoring companies, are also being breached in Salesforce. So that raises a big concern as well. So anyway, so, so love my metrics. So metric of the day is the zero trust architectures reduced org breach cost by 1.76 million for but and five when they didn't have it in the first place. So IBM data breach report. All right, great. So I'll go ahead and pass the torch off to you, Adam, and I'll just let me know when to advance your slides.
Okay. Would it be easier if I presented, or do you want to present?
Oh, I'm fine. I do this all the time, so.
Okay. I have a bunch of animations, so when it seems like I'm done talking about something, feel free to click to the next one.
Okay, sure.
But okay, so yeah, so topic today: how do you build trust in your Salesforce architecture? Again, a topic I'm very passionate about, and you've obviously heard some of the reasons why trust is so important with all these data breaches going on. So today, I want to introduce the Salesforce Well Architected program briefly. Talk a little bit more about some of the dangers of ignoring trust, and I'm going to take a small deep dive into part of the well-architected framework, which is the trusted pillar. So we're going to talk about how to architect a trusted solution. We're going to then deep dive on that, how to make your solution even more trusted. And then we're going to architect together a little bit. My favorite part of architecture is getting hands-on and building things. So we're going to take a look at an architecture diagram and try to see if we can make it a little more trusted together. And then we're going to wrap things up. So if you'll click ahead, Matt, you will see this Asian Astro in a few of my slides. That is going to be, I know some people like to take screenshots, and I have a lot of bullets on some of these slides. So whenever you see Asian Astro, that means I'm done with bullets for the slide. Feel free to take your screenshots at that point. So first topic, what is well architected? So Salesforce a while back actually relaunched this program recently, but also came out with this framework. And the idea was, how do you build on Salesforce, right? And if you ask any architect, they're going to tell you the same thing. It depends, right? It depends on a lot of different factors. But it's great to have a set of best practices, right? Patterns, anti-patterns, suggestions. So if you're just kind of getting started with Salesforce architecture, Salesforce wanted to come up with a foundation for where you can look. And if you're experienced and people are still asking you, well, why did you do it this way? Now you have a resource to point to and said, well, Salesforce said to do it this way. And so the well-architected framework, you can find out more at architect.salesforce.com, but there's three primary pillars. It's all about creating a trusted solution, an easy solution, and an adaptable solution. When we talk about being easy, it's not that it's easy to build, but it should be easy for users to use. And when we're talking about being adaptable, it should be, able to be changed, able to be tweaked. A bunch of people can be working on it all at once, and it'll still be strong. But of course, today, at our Salesforce Security Office Hours, we're going to be focusing on the trusted pillar. So if you click ahead once, Matt, we're going to be looking at this trusted pillar here. And the trusted pillar is based on three kind of sub-pillars. Your solution should be secure, your solution should be reliable, and your solution should be compliant. And so we're going to take a look at some of my tips for making sure all of those happen so that we're building a trusted solution together. All right. So as we've heard already, trust is an ongoing problem, right? Unfortunately, it's not a situation where we can set things up and then our solution is just trusted permanently, right? No, we need to keep working at it. We need to keep figuring out what are the new threats and how can we address them. And so we've had some pretty big, high-profile data breaches, security breaches this year. Matt talked a little bit about Gainsight. We've also heard, a data loader imposter was affecting users, and another company recently from Salesforce called Drift also had a breach. And through this, as you saw in the screenshot before, there have been hundreds of orgs affected by this. And the numbers only get bigger from there, right? Beyond hundreds of orgs affected, we also, if you click ahead, Matt, we've seen millions of customers' data in these hundreds of orgs that have been hacked. And one of the hackers recently, if you click ahead one more time, claims that they have access to 1 billion records that they have hacked. And so obviously very important to be making sure we're keeping our org secure as more threats come up, make it even more secure. Salesforce, to their credit, is doing a little bit, but there's definitely more work they can do, and we can make our orgs more secure on our own by taking advantage of some of the things they already have given us, but maybe haven't implemented by default. Beyond just losing customer trust, though, if we go ahead to the next slide, we're also going to be losing money for violating trust, right? A few years back, Matt mentioned he's in Europe right now. Europe passed the GDPR, which I believe is the General Data Protection Regulation, that basically says you have access to your own data. You have the right to be forgotten if you don't want a company to own your data anymore. You can tell them to delete it, and they have to delete it within a certain period of time. And if you don't do this, they can fine you very large amounts of money. And you see on here some of the biggest tech companies in the world, Meta, Amazon, right, getting major fines in the hundreds of millions and even over $1 billion in one circumstance for violating customers' trust. And so not only is it important from a kind of business perspective, it's important, and a trust, consumer perspective, it's important from a financial aspect as well. So these are all definitely things to keep in mind as we're thinking about, okay, why do I have to continuously secure my Salesforce org?
Yep. And in addition to like just the fines and penalties, I think the business impacts are huge too. I mean, I think they just seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger, especially out here as well. Look at JLR. I mean, that price tag is over almost close to $2 billion, and the UK government had to do a bailout, and it's even caused legislation to come out against that. So, I mean, then you tacking on GDPR. I mean, I'm actually curious if JLR violating any GDPR as well, in addition to that, after that, and that breach of customers' data was exposed as well in that. So I think they might get hit even more, even after the initial, cost of just shutting down their distribution lines. So,
Yeah, and new regulations coming up all the time that we also need to keep in mind.
yep, exactly.
All right, so I mentioned I was going to talk about some of the well-architected pillars here under how to architect a trusted solution. And so the first one I'm going to talk about here is the secure pillar. So Salesforce calls it secure, but to me, this really means security first, right? And so when we're talking about security first, if we click ahead, it's really security at every level, right? It's at the organizational level, it's at the session level, the individual user level, right? And the data level. We need to make sure everything is secure across the org in every possible way. And so one of the first things I think about when we're setting up users, if we go to the next bullet, is going to be licenses. And click ahead again. These are, different types of licenses for different types of users, right? Some users are going to need Salesforce licenses. Some users need specific package licenses. And some users are going to need Experience Cloud licenses. And all of these need to be thought about a little bit differently because they all handle different things. You can only give one license per user. And so we need to be very careful making sure we're giving users the right license for the work they're going to need to be able to do.
Yep. I also find like the license, a lot of people don't think about this, but license also impacts security in other ways because certain licenses let you do more things you can with other license without, but without having a license or lower licenses. And so by adding the license, I like kind of that's why I'm glad that you have this on the slide because that's your first layer of security, I think, is the license itself. Great example is if you go all the way down to like the guest user is the guest user, you can disable the ability to upload files. But as soon as you become a licensed user, you no longer have that ability. Right. So you're gaining the ability to have the right to always upload files if you want to look at it. And then there's other things beyond that, of course, like you can now share records directly to those users where you can't do that with the guest user. And then if you add, then if you keep going up the ladder there, So you've got your, customer community, you've got some then customer community plus, now you've got roles and partner and all that, right? Then you go into internal CRM and so forth. And you keep getting more and more things that you can do, which means you're able to open it up more and more and more with the profiles and permission sets, right?
Speaking of profiles and permission sets, that's actually the next bullet on here, right? Once we set up the licenses, we need to be thinking about our security model. And so if we click ahead once, right, when we're talking about our security model and we're architecting how we want to set it up, we need to be thinking about these different types of users, these user personas, and what access do they actually need? What should they be able to do? What should they not be able to do? What's the minimum amount of access we can give them to be able to do their job, right? Different types of users are going to need different types of licenses. Different types of users are going to need different type of security. So when we're setting up things like our permission set groups or org-wide defaults, our sharing rules, right? We need to think about what are the different types of users. Do we want to have somebody with a bunch of access? Do we want some users to be read-only, some users to be read-write? Do we need some super users, maybe with some elevated permissions in their perm set group? So we need to be thinking about these things to make sure people have the access they need, but people don't necessarily have more access than they need.
Yep.
Right. And
Yeah.
so beyond setting up our security model, as I mentioned, I'm a developer at heart, and so it's always important to me to make sure our code is also secure. And so when we're talking about secure in code, these are going to be things like our API access, right? Our integrations that we're calling. How are we setting things up? Are we using named credentials? Hopefully we're not putting usernames and passwords directly into our code. And then also securing the code itself, right? So using things like with and without sharing. And so this is going to be asking the question like, do we want our code to be able to access the entire org, or do we want the code to be operating as an individual user? And there are different use cases for both. Sometimes we need to be able to access and query data that users can't necessarily see. And sometimes we want to say, no, if you're running a query, you should only be looking at data that you have access to. And so these are questions to keep in mind when we're building our org, but we need to start thinking about this first. And that's why it's the first tip I put in here.
Yep. And one other thing, Adam, that I you don't hear people say a lot, which was great that you said, was like what you shouldn't be able to do. And so I'm a big advocate for creating anti-personas or personas of like what are really thinking about the person who shouldn't be able to access your environment, like the attacker outside. Create a shiny hunters persona or something like that, because that's really will kind of make you think about, okay, what things are, it gives you good test cases and other things like that as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you to Rachel shouting out positive and negative
Yep.
testing as well. Yeah, we
Yep,
need to be
exactly.
thinking about how can we break the system? How can somebody else break the system? Is the system throwing errors like we expect it to? Is the system throwing the right errors, right? Are they directing users to the right place? Are they also blocking users from doing things they shouldn't be doing? So definitely all good things to keep in mind as well.
Yep.
All right, so my next tip, Salesforce calls it being compliant. For me, this is about knowing your limits, right? And so we talked about this a little bit with some of the European regulations, but generally, what I found, at least for even US companies, if we're operating globally and we need to implement a regulation for Europe, we're not going to figure out is the data in Europe, is the data not? We're just going to implement it for everybody, right? And it's going to make everybody more secure. And we see a lot of times, I know California tends to copy a lot of the Europe regulations. And then again, we're not going to figure out what data is in California. We're just going to implement it for everybody. And so the major thing on here, if we click ahead, is where does your data live and where are your users, right? And so sometimes there are specific regulations that, okay, well, if we are working with European data, we need to make sure that their data is following a regulation immediately, and then we can roll it out for everybody else. And these are going to be things like legal adherence to some of these laws, but also ethical standards and accessibility. Who can access this data and from where? And so those are things we need to be thinking about as well. Beyond that, we also, when we're thinking about knowing your limits, we're talking about data governance, right? Where should our data live and for how long? And so this is going to be things like, can we archive data at some point? If we have records that are 10 years old, do we need to keep them around or can we archive them? Can we delete them? Are they still being used? Are they still being looked at? Do they need to be kept for compliance reasons? Right? The more data we have in an object, the slower it's going to be to query it. So if we can archive a lot of the old data, it's going to potentially speed up the org and be a little more trusted that all of the data in there is going to be relevant.
And the more data in your org, the more that they can steal if someone goes in there and tries and breaches your org as well. And a lot of people don't think about that as well.
A great point too. Yeah. Yeah, I see this all the time. Oh, your password's been compromised. I was like, well, I haven't used that website in 10 years. I'm like, doesn't mean I didn't upload an address on there. Doesn't mean I didn't upload a phone number on there. Doesn't mean I didn't upload credit card information up there. So just because you haven't used something in a while, if they still have your data, it potentially could be hacked.
Yep.
All right. Obviously, we're in the era of AI, whether we like it or not, and we need to start thinking about what are the AI guardrails we want to be putting up, right? I'm sure people have heard about the stories of AI agents giving discounts for things that people didn't actually buy, right? We need to be telling our AI agents what should you not be allowed to do, right? What do we want you to do, and what do we want to stop you from doing? And so I think some of the AI is getting better about maybe not doing things they shouldn't be on their own, but in a lot of cases we still need to be explicit, like don't give users other users' information. Don't give out passwords. Don't give discounts without, an order number, right? So there are specific guardrails we need to put up, one to be compliant, but also to make sure that, we're not doing things we shouldn't be doing, and we're building trusted AI solutions as well. So AI guardrails are increasingly becoming more important too. And the last major point I want to talk about for knowing your limits is building for your audience, right? And so these are going to be things like localization and translation. And so when we think about, if we're building for people in different countries, have we localized information? Have we translated text in a certain way? Have we translated pages in a certain way? Are we making sure that they're being able to understand what it is we're building for them? If we click ahead once, and if we click ahead one more time, actually, in addition to building for your own audience, date formats are very important. I actually was looking at the dates for French Touch Dreaming a little while back, and I think I saw it was happening on 2/12. And I was like, 2/12, that's unfortunate. It was in February. I missed it. And then I realized, oh, actually, this conference is happening in France, and they do dates a little bit differently there. So I think it was December 2nd, a few days ago. So I still couldn't end up going. But again, it's very important when you are talking about dates and sharing them to your users. Are they in a format that users can understand? Because users don't want to have to think about who posted this date. Where does this person live? Is this date 2/12 meaning February 12th, or does it mean December 2nd? And so making sure that we're sharing information in a way that's going to be relevant for where our users are. So maybe spelling out the month, for example. Things like that we need to be thinking about how to be compliant, but also building trust within our users and making sure we know where they are and we're communicating to them in terms that they'll understand.
Yeah, and another thing to think about too is if like with especially with date formats and things like that, or even either and other types of localization or even translation is a real impacts that they could have. Yes, it might be annoying that you missed the show, but think about dates and other types of things that that go in the legal agreements. I think there's a much difference between 12/3 and or whatever, the date
Sure,
and the
yeah.
first date. And I've
Deadline,
had
yeah.
that happen before in agreements doing with things. And I'm like, wait a second, no, we didn't sign on that day. And then they put it in the rest of the world format, I'll call it, and then we put it in the US format. And I think those are things to be thinking about too. And there's a lot of real types of issues that can happen, if your dates and other types of things like that are just, have a different meaning to somebody else versus to you.
For sure, yeah. All right, click ahead one more time. I think that's the end of this slide here if anyone wants to grab a screenshot. But yeah, and for something like, February and December, maybe we have an idea. Oh yeah, why would French Touch Dreaming be in February? It's usually in December. But if you're
Yep.
looking at a deadline and something says, 7/6, is it July 6th or is it June 7th? Like either one could potentially be plausible. And so when we are talking about more serious things, it becomes all the more important too.
Yep. And even the localization, I don't have any specific things off head, but sometimes even words or phrases mean different things to different people in different regions. So,
Yeah, good point too. All right. And last tip for well architected is what Salesforce calls reliable. For me, this is about building trust, right? And it's ultimately asking the question, if we click ahead once, can users trust your solution, right? Is it available? Is it performant? And is it scalable? This is really one of the most important things when it comes to building a trusted solution. Do users trust the application and the tools you're giving them? And so some of the questions I like to ask are, if we click ahead, constantly be asking yourself, how can I make it faster? Right? Users are used to getting things instantaneously nowadays, right? You think about, I get frustrated when a page doesn't load right away. right? I want things immediately. So how can you be making your solution faster? And so for things like this, we're going to be thinking about, if we click ahead of the next couple bullets, right? Do we want our data in real time or near real time? Do we need the data to show up immediately? Or can we maybe let users click ahead and have some processes going on in the background and finish it up later? And so for that, we can utilize things like asynchronous functionality where appropriate, right? A bunch of different asynchronous options as well. And one of my favorite features on Salesforce is the platform cache. So if we have a bunch of data that we're querying constantly that's not going to change very often, we can put it in the platform cache, and then we don't actually have to query it at all. We can just pull it from the cache immediately and can save a lot of performance power that way. One of the other questions I ask myself is, are there large data volumes to consider, right? LDV. This is situations where maybe we have large amounts of data in an object, right? Millions of records, or even just tens of thousands of records all tied to single users or single parent records. And so some solutions to combat this is, of course, bulkification, right? We want to make sure we're always assuming we're operating on a lot of records at once. And so our application is able to scale that way. And then also we want to make sure we're avoiding data skew. And so if we find that, a bunch of records have the same parent, maybe we need to split that out. We see this a lot with accounts, for example. We see maybe, thousands and thousands of orders under a single account. Can we maybe split that up into sub-accounts and help with that data skew issue a little bit? Again, this is going to help your tool and your products be more performant. And the last major point when we talk about trust is standards. And so one of the things I see sometimes is, I'm building a tool on Salesforce. My teammate is building a tool on Salesforce. My other teammate is building a tool on Salesforce. And all of these tools work very differently. And unfortunately, like it or not, your users don't care what platform you're building your tools on. They just care if the tools work. And your users don't want to have to remember, what tool am I in? How does this button work? If buttons work differently across different tools, right? If they know they're using Salesforce, they want to know the buttons are going to work a certain way. They want to know modals are going to work a certain way. So make sure you have some standards across whatever team you're building on, or even among your own tools that you're building, and you have a general consistent appearance and functionality, right? Do things look somewhat the same? Do they work somewhat the same, right? And the other thing to keep in mind here is, are we utilizing the functionality that Salesforce has had tens of thousands of people building, right? And are we utilizing standard objects where possible if we click ahead once?
Yep. Actually, I have one quick side story, which is kind of funny. Speaking of consistency and functionality, before there was Lightning or anything like that, Salesforce itself, being a big company, had a little bit of their own consistency issue. I heard at one point in time there was more than 80 to 100 implementations of the dropdown in Salesforce. And so, if you want to talk about different experiences and slight inconsistencies across Salesforce itself, that's a great reason why you should not be doing different implementations of the same thing. But I think that also goes more to compostability too, though. So,
For sure. Yeah, okay. So standard objects where possible. This is, Salesforce, again, they're a big company. And if they've spent tens of thousands of people building some functionality, they've probably built it out a little bit more than your small team is going to be able to. So take advantage of that, right? And so there's a lot of functionality built into standard objects. Salesforce kind of maintains them, upgrades them, right? I'm a big fan of custom objects personally, but even with that, we can repurpose standard objects for our own purposes. For example, I work for Google Play. We use the account object to keep track of internal developers, right? So, we're not necessarily selling to these accounts, but these accounts are our customers, and we're keeping track of them using accounts and contacts. And so even if you're repurposing it, there's still a lot of great functionality there that you can take advantage of.
and another thing I think people should be thinking about too is, just because it's named accounts or named opportunities doesn't mean that's exactly what you need to use it for. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways you can use accounts, and a lot of different ways people use accounts, opportunities, and so forth. I mean, I worked for a large bank at one point, and while I was working at Salesforce, and they were using opportunities it was really about tracking a relationship for wealth management. And it was basically where someone agreed to invest a certain amount of money, but nothing was actually committed. It was just an agreement. And then they were trying to using opportunity to track that relationship of that customer and their agreement. And so I think there's a lot of different ways that you can use the objects. The other thing I think also we see is overuse of the objects, right? Where you have too many people playing in the same playground. And maybe sometimes it does make sense to go off on your own or into a custom object if maybe you're stepping too much stepping on each other's toes, right? Or even I hate to say it, but another org maybe too. But let's not talk about that. So
Sounds good. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So we talked about how to make our solution trusted. But again, these are Salesforce Security Office Hours, where I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into the trusted part of it. And I think we've talked about some of these things already. But my first point on here is that we want to follow the principle of least access in our security model. So again, what is the minimum amount of access that somebody needs to be able to do their job or use your tool, right? And a lot of times I'll be comparing users even, and I'll see somebody can do something and somebody else can't. And I'll see the first person has 15 more permission sets than the second person. And again, the easy solution is, they'll just assign all 15 and see, I'm sure they'll get access then. But that's obviously not what we want to do. We want to drill down to exactly what is giving this first person access and figure out what is the minimum amount we can give them. And it's the same thing here. If we don't need to be giving users access to objects they shouldn't be having, we shouldn't be. I was in an org once that I saw a bunch of profiles randomly had access to the customized application permission or the view setup permission. Well, users shouldn't be, playing around in setup if they don't know what they're doing necessarily. So we need to make sure that when we are creating our security model, we are being very careful and only giving people the access that they need.
yep, and I loved
Uh,
your post earlier as well about to asking. I think it was you asking Salesforce, please separate some of the setup permissions so you don't have this super permissions.
yeah, I know there's a few initiatives at Salesforce going on there too.
Yep.
And yeah, Matt, you mentioned this one before, the guest access in Experience Cloud. So Salesforce, to their credit, has locked it down a little bit somewhat recently, but at least for a while, it was wide open. I think there are even now some checkboxes that if you don't uncheck them when you're setting things up, it's just going to give the guest user more access than they should. I know at one
Mhm.
point when you enabled Experience Cloud, I think it made all of the external access public read write by default also. And so you had to go in and change them all to private. So when you are enabling Experience Cloud, it's a very powerful tool. But again, make sure that users, external users, and especially the guest user, does not have access to things they should not have access
Yep. And I hear there's a good book that tells all about the history of that and what you should be
to.
doing. Sorry.
All right. In addition to guest user access, I think one of the biggest issues with a lot of the breaches we've seen this year are issues around connected apps. And again, Salesforce, to their credit, have done a little bit of work recently in making this a little bit more secure. But there's still a lot of danger that can be done with connected apps if people aren't careful with them and if people are misusing them. So when we're thinking about connected apps, we need to be asking ourselves a few questions, right? First one is, who can get access to the connected apps? And the second one is, what do they have access to? Right? It's very tempting in a connected app when it says, what, scopes should you have? Oh, I'll just check them all. But again, you're giving the connected app a lot more access than they should have. You also have the option to configure what objects should a connected app have access to. You also have the option to configure what profiles and permission sets does somebody need to be able to get access to this connected app. So make sure, again, using that principle of least access, we're restricting those connected apps as much as possible to mitigate the types of data breaches we've seen earlier this year. The next step I would say is something that I admittedly haven't paid too much attention to until recently, but IP ranges, a great tool as well, making sure that you know where your users are coming from, right? If you know your users are all coming through a VPN, for example, if you know your integrations are all coming from a same set of IP ranges, set them up. Make sure your users are only coming in through certain channels, and that'll also mitigate if someone's credentials fall into the wrong hands. They're not able to access anything because they're not coming through in the right location. So IP ranges are very strong. Another way to restrict access to your org.
Yep. One thing though I'm always advocating for is not only just setting the IP ranges on the profile, but also going into session settings and checking that box to check IP ranges on every request and not just login. Especially if you look at like on some of the OAuth application breaches, they're technically not logging into Salesforce. That's already an established session. So I'm pretty certain that the IP ranges wouldn't actually block those OAuth connections unless you're checking on every single connection. And also, one other thing I know recently found out was if you're blocking IP ranges on the connected app itself with the settings inside of the connected app, that actually other checkbox and session settings doesn't apply to that. It will still do it only on that initial connection. And so what you need to do is ensure it's still, making that's why I advocate at the profile level in it, because I think that's a lot stronger than doing it just at the connected app level from a permission basis. And even though you could technically share a profile across connected apps and integrations, I personally do not like that. I like to have a dedicated profile especially if it's an external vendor. Then you're able to have those specific IPs for that vendor and having each vendor locked down a little bit more.
All right, and everybody keep that exact point in mind for the next slide, actually. Uh, and quick question I see from Scott, what are your thoughts on a revolving token policy for connected apps? Should at minimum refreshed on a 6-month basis? I think that is going to come down to a few different factors, right? The architect's favorite answer, it depends. Obviously, the more restrictive it is, the more secure it's going to be. However, I also am very annoyed when I have to change my password for things every month. And so I think there's a balance between how do we make it the most secure, and do we actually need this token to be refreshed, with this frequency? And so
Yep.
I think depending on a few different factors, obviously the more it's changed, the more secure it's going to be, but not necessarily required. And sometimes it creates more overhead to manage it as well, and that can create its own set of risks.
Yep. I think is it necessary or is it not necessary? And sometimes people are doing things just to check the box. I mean, I think tokens for integrations are a little bit different, but for example, passwords, I read an article a while back about where Microsoft put out that said a password is insecure is the day it gets breached. Requiring users to actually change their passwords every 90 days could actually make it less secure because you're having users change their password to from and it's possible they could be changed it from a secure password to a password that has been breached. So now you're actually making your system less secure by requiring password changes. Since token rotation is a little bit different, you're not going to have that case because it's going to be unique and different and won't be somewhere else. So, but I think that just comes down to, okay, what frequency, what's the risk? Like, if you're, if that token is to an external provider, maybe it makes sense to rotate it more. So because of things like this Gainsight thing and all those, but maybe, if it's internal, maybe, and you feel like it's safe, maybe you don't need to rotate it. But I think that's an internal decision and thinking about what's the risk in the organization, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Few last tips here. Again, for integrations, Salesforce recently released an API integrations only profile. So make sure you're using that for the integrations, right? Integrations shouldn't have access to things a normal Salesforce user would. So we have a profile just for that now. And then lastly, again, to reiterate, use the principle of least access when it comes not only for users and setting up your security model, but for connected apps and integrations as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Yay.
All right. And so with that, we're going to take a couple minutes to architect together a little bit. So in this scenario, we have a architecture diagram with a bunch of integrations. And you are an architect and you've just inherited an org. And you're using a single user for all your integrations, right? Somebody named Greg Jacobs set up a user with a great name, Greg Jacobs, all integrations user. And right now, this user is the one who is being used for the SAP order integration, the Oracle order integration, the Oracle account integration, the Sage account integration, and the Azure account integration. And we've given them a Salesforce license. We've given them a custom integration profile we've created, and we granted access to accounts, orders, context, knowledge, a bunch of different things. And we're having this user act on behalf of the integrations and update all of these records for all of these different integrations. Are there any things we can do to redesign this to provide a better org authorization and make it a bit more secure? Right. And Matt hinted at one of the answers in when we were talking about the previous slide, if anyone was
Yeah,
paying attention to that. And I think I had one of the bullets on it too. Yeah, Patrick.
I would say switch to the API integration user. You don't want to tie it to just one particular user if he leaves the company or whatever, and you have to freeze or remove his license, and you have to reconstruct everything aside from, security issues. So I would say change the license to API integration.
Makes sense. Okay. So yeah, so we're going to want to maybe tweak how this user works. We don't want to tie to a specific individual, like you said, in case Greg Jacobs leaves the company. We don't want him being the only one who can sign in with this user. And I think you also mentioned switching it to the API only integrations profile, which is going to restrict what the user can do anyway.
One thing I'll give a little bit of a hint here that I see that could be a issue is you're using the same user for SAP, for Oracle, for Sage, for Azure. And so, what happens just like with the Gainsight breach if, let's say, SAP, all their tokens are breached?
Now, yeah, now all of a sudden we breached one integration, and now we've actually breached 5 integrations. It's a very good point.
Yep, yep, exactly.
So,
So I think that's the key, why always separate users per integration.
yeah, so great point. So yeah, exactly right. We want to have separate users for integration, one for security purposes, but also for like ease of use purposes. If I go look at a record and I see the Greg Jacobs all integrations user last updated it, well, how did it get updated? Was it from the Oracle account integration? Was it from the Sage account integration? Was it from the Azure account integration? I have no idea. Now I have to go see when was it updated? What integration was running during that time? Was it a scheduled job? Was it just being pushed in asynchronously? Right? If I'm a user and I don't have access to the setup menu, I have no idea how this got updated. I just see that some integration user, I'm probably going to ping Greg Jacobs, I know that, but I don't have any way to figure out what integration updated this. So not only is it less secure, but it's also less practical.
Yep, exactly. I know I've had the same problem too. It's like integration user updated the record. Like, okay, then you start looking at the change history. When did it happen? Try to correlate it with other things, and it's an absolute mess. On the security side, though, one thing I also wanted to mention, in addition to just one of your vendor getting breached and then multiple breaches, also imagining if you're using this, your user is probably over provisioned as well if you're sharing integrations because if SAP probably needs different integrations than Sage, for example. And so now you're actually, if SAP gets breached, then now you're basically set your user as a sysadmin. You have bigger exposure because your permissioning is shared versus creating just the permissions that that integration needs. So even if that vendor gets breached, like in the Gainsight and Salesforce Drift breaches, at least it's a smaller subset of things they can do instead of having all access to your entire system.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, I see Rachel in the chat, one integration user per integration. Also, yeah, so we've called out a few of those things. So we want to not have a human user doing this. We want an integration user. We talked about only using one integration user per data source. We talked about putting them on the API only integrations profile. Anything else that anybody sees wrong with this? Maybe take a look at what data can some of these integrations access. If we look at what the integrations are for, I see an order integration, another order integration, an account integration, and another account integration. And I see we have access to the accounts, the orders, the contacts, and knowledge. Anyone any concerns surrounding that?
Feel free
Downgrade
to
the license itself as integration. Yep.
feel free to speak up, anybody, if you to know the answer to his question.
Least privilege.
Least privilege, exactly. And so we probably don't want to be granting all this access to these integrations that look like they're very targeted. I don't know if any of these accounts and order integrations need access to knowledge necessarily, for example. And so if we move ahead to the next slide, Matt, we're going to look at one possible solution for how we could re-architect this. I think we covered most of the points here. But this is, again, with all architecture, it depends. So this is one possible solution. But what we kind of recommend here is, like we said, removing the human user, using an integration user, and also using one integration user per data source, right? So we'll have an Oracle account integration user, which is going to be different from the Azure account integration user. These users are going to be on the integration license, and they're going to be using the minimum access API only profile. We're going to be granting them reduce permissions using the principle of least access with permission set groups or permission sets instead of profiles. And you see here, we only need accounts and orders because we just have accounts and orders integrations. We don't need access to contacts. We don't need access to knowledge. Again, we're asking for our data to be breached when we didn't even need to, right? Why should we put contact data at risk if these integration users don't need it? And we also want to make sure we're IP restricting these integrations, right? We want to make sure our Oracle integration user is only accessing things from Oracle servers. Same with SAP and Azure and some of the others.
Yep.
Right?
And one other thing I was thinking too, this is a little bit out of the security realm, but more of around orchestration, is putting put it inside of like an ESB or MuleSoft or something. Because I see a lot of things here that are very similar in nature too, which it might be better. And also there are other security things, by putting your integrations inside of an ESB as well, instead of directly connecting to your Salesforce environment.
Yeah, and again, that's also why we said one possible solution, right? In some cases, we might need MuleSoft or some other sort of middleware like that to connect all these integrations. In some cases, we won't, and again, that's going to depend on what is our budget, what are our resources, and what are we looking to do here.
Yep, exactly.
All right. So hopefully that makes sense to how we made our solution a bit more secure. We move on to my last slide here. Going to wrap things up. We're going to, how can we make sure all of our attackers are like these sad AI-generated burglars on the right here? First point is that, again, Salesforce Well Architected is available for you, including all the trusted resources we talked about, but also how to make it easy and adaptable, architect.salesforce.com. If we go to the next bullet, we want to make sure our solution is trusted. And that means three things, right? We're talking about making it secure, which I call security first. We want to make sure it is compliant, which again, knowing what your limits are. And we want to make sure it's reliable. We want to make sure we are building trust with our users. And then lastly, we talked about a bunch, restricting access wherever possible, right? And this is going to come down to a few things, including managing our security model. We also want to manage our guest user access, pay very close attention to that. As we saw with a lot of breaches this year, we need to make sure our connected apps are locked down. And then lastly, integrations in general, right? We talked about some tips for how to clean up some integrations, but obviously depends on a lot of different circumstances, and we want to make sure they have as minimal access as possible. And I see a question from Patrick here. It makes sense having a new user and separate license for each integration. For smaller companies, the cost of licenses can really add up. Any thoughts on ways to mitigate that? I believe, Matt or somebody else, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought Salesforce was making the integration licenses free.
Yeah, well, actually, the integration licenses, you get 5 free, last I heard.
5 free, that's what it was. Okay.
And then it's $10 a month. So even unless you're a really, really small company, $10 a month really shouldn't be that much. Okay,
Gotcha.
if you think of the grand scheme of things and think about the cost that we just talked from the beginning, I mean, I'll give you Patrick, a great metric for you here from a small business perspective. There's a metric out there that says 60% of small businesses will go out of a business within 6 months after a breach. So the question I would raise is to a small business is, can you not afford to pay $10 a month, or you cannot afford to pay, or you should not say you cannot afford to pay $10 a month, when if you get hit with a single breach, you have a 60% chance of going out of business.
That's an excellent point. I had no idea it was even, as reasonable as $10 a month. So that's excellent.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And there are 5 free on top of that. Yeah.
Right. That's perfect.
And more than that, it's Starbucks. Yeah. So
right.
anyways, I see another one. I don't know if you want to answer, from David. Do you see that one?
I did. I thought that might have been more for you. I'm not as familiar with some of the monitoring tools beyond Shield.
I'll probably take it on before we go to the next slide. But it says, what's your general thoughts on dynamic monitoring tools? My company is mandating SaaS monitoring tooling to avoid being put on my earlier slide. In your case, it is App Omni and Microsoft Defender for cloud ops. You looked at the latter, and it seems that seems to want quite a brand set of assigned. Okay, maybe it's better, David, if you ask the question directly, because I'm kind of getting lost in the question.
I think it sounds like, and we've actually run into this issues with some security tools that our Google team has wanted us to implement. Is they ask you to assign a security tool, and that security tool has way too much access, right? They're telling you to
Yes.
create a profile and give the profile all this access. And what? No, I'm trying to limit the number of profiles, and I don't want profiles to have all this access. So, how do you balance against the principle of least privilege while you're installing security tools that are having a ton of access that themselves can potentially be breached and cause a problem, ironically enough, is what it sounds like, David, the question is?
Yeah, that is my question. Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So I think obviously a balance here. I know our team has pushed back when our kind of corp eng teams have gone in and say, hey, create a new user with a new profile with all this access. No. We're not doing that. We'll create a user with some permission subgroups that are restricted and, have the access they need. But we're not just blanket creating new users with a ton of access. So
Yep.
definitely, I would argue if any of these tools are asking for or demanding profiles be created, um, I would argue in 2025, and as we're almost in 2026, if they're still asking for everything to be done in the profile, I would question how secure these tools really are and if they really understand how Salesforce security works.
Sure.
I know I've used App Omni before. And so, yeah, there are some elevated permissions they need to be able to check who has access to customized application, how many system admins are there in the org, right? And so, again, there is a balance there. Unfortunately, I think the answer is always it depends. But I would say do be very intentional about what you're granting these apps access to.
Hmm.
Push back when they are recommending things that are not best practice, like profiles with a ton of access they don't need, or profiles with write access, right? So push back where it's appropriate. But again, there is always going to be a balance there. These tools can be helpful though, but again, make sure you're using tools that are known and are established and have been trusted by others.
Yep. And I'll echo exactly what you were saying as well, that I mean, regardless is it's Microsoft product, App Omni, or anybody, always scrutinize what permissions that they need to your org. Maybe you're not using all the functionality of App Omni, for example. Maybe you're only using part of it. Maybe, so I would always ask the question, why? Why do you need this access? What are you doing that requires this access? Then, if you want to cut, you have things like you can use their own, really, you could use their own tool to monitor what they're doing in your org too, or other things like Shield on top of that if you already have Shield too. So I think there's things that you can do to, just to still look at what they're doing in your org, even if you're giving them access. But I think it comes down to in the end, the tool needs tools like that need access to your metadata to be able to see what's going on in your org. Maybe they don't need access, depending on what they're doing, your data, but maybe just your metadata. But it really depends again on the tool and on what they're doing. But just definitely, like we've been saying, don't share the user. So I mean, the worst thing I've seen is companies would have a remote backup user, which pretty much needs access to all of your data in the org because they're doing remote backup. Then they share that same user with another user integration that needs just minimal access. And so definitely restrict the access as much as you can and scrutinize and evaluate to ensure that the access is necessary. So, all right, great. Well, we're running to pretty much the end. I think we're pretty much out of time and we're at the end of the session. And just always, like I like to say, only you can prevent and contain data breaches in Salesforce, according to Cody and Astro. Next week, let me see, where is it? We're taking a holiday break, so the next office hours won't be until January 8th. And then we'll be having Blanca as a speaker talking about what security certifications do you need as a Salesforce professional in 2026. A little bit off the security topic, but still very interesting. And then last slide is just a few of our resources, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, my book. If you want to buy it, it goes to all proceeds go to charity. There's some more security resources, the well-architected trust framework. And also, I don't know if Adam, if you wanted to share, if Ari was shared the link to your class think that's probably useful too for people.
Yeah, I think we put it in the chat, but also happy to share it separately as well.
And then if anyone, I think, feel free to reach out to Adam or myself if you have further questions. But at this point, we can stay a little bit longer, open things up to Q&A if anyone has any questions. If not, we can go ahead and wrap up. I'll give a few seconds for people if anyone has any questions.
All right. Well, appreciate you having me on, Matt,
Yep.
and thank you everybody for coming.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Everyone, hope you have a nice, happy holiday season.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.